Hello, everybody. It's Fernando Labastida here once again with Jimmy Jobe, CEO and co-founder of Verge Technologies, in another episode of thoughts on the enterprise, on enterprise IT, on the hybrid cloud, multi-cloud environment. And Jimmy, I've been really anxious to kind of get you to break down for me this whole concept of sort of like the vertical trap in cloud management versus horizontal cloud management. Explain that to us, and what's the significance for enterprises with multiple clouds?
Thank you much, Fernando. Yes, I guess to kind of break that down a little bit, I want to kind of drop back to, what do we mean by a hybrid cloud or multi-cloud, right? And so it's really from the enterprise perspective, it's about managing my operations in different cloud or compute environments across the enterprise, right? And so each one of those nodes, if you would, each one of those cloud environments brings its own special flavor of service levels and tools and what you can do and what you can't do and what you're charged for and what you're not charged for, right? And so essentially when people talk about I can do hybrid cloud management, what they're really saying is in each one of those specific silos, or if you would, or each one of those clouds, I've got the tools in that cloud to manage vertically your technology stack and infrastructure, right? And so you say, okay, so I've got 5 different cloud environments, let's say in my enterprise, and every one of those cloud environments I can manage top to bottom vertically in there. But then you say, well, what about going across that? What about the horizontal side? So the horizontal side of that is what we're terming as cloud convergence, right? And so what cloud convergence is really being able to manage your enterprise IT both vertically within a cloud environment and horizontally across different cloud environments, right? And so essentially you're managing many clouds as one cloud, right? And
Right.
you say, well, that sounds great, but tell me more about the benefits around that, right? The benefits, number one, is a single view of all your technology stack and your assets, right? Your applications, your databases. You know where they're at. You can see them in one view, right? You know how they're operating. You know if they're bogging down. You know if there's an outage. You know everything because you are going both horizontally across as well as vertically down, right?
Right.
Secondarily, you have then the ability to do what I'm going to call a federated management model, where if you've got visibility across all of your, let's say, your database assets, right? It could be your
Mhm.
application assets, but let's say you've got visibility across all of your database assets, right? It gives you then the ability to apply performance policies, to provide maintenance policies, security policies that are common across all of those assets versus trying to figure out what I can do in this cloud or this cloud, right? It gives you that ability, that federated management across all of that. The third thing is that being able to manage that way gives you a greater ability to automate a lot of the that you do to manage all of your assets across those. So you can apply AI, you can intelligently manage those assets and apply those policies and apply those management and maintenance rules across that so that you have a lot more visibility into your assets. And so if you've got more visibility, you can manage them better and you can drop your OpEx and CapEx cost that it takes you to manage each one of those particular silos or cloud environments versus just trying to manage one. You manage it all as if it's in one virtual data center, right? That's the
Right.
concept, right? Is that you're breaking down the boundaries and barriers between all those different cloud environments and allowing you to manage across them, right? The resilience of your environment goes up. And at the same time that the automation provides you cost savings and visibility of what's happening every hour, every minute, every second of every day.
Right.
Does that help?
Very much so. And so really, if you look at it from this point of view, vertical cloud management is actually not the state that we want to be in.
No, that's the interim state we're in today.
That's the suboptimal
Right.
situation. And we want to get to a federated management situation with a horizontal cloud management approach.
Absolutely. And like I say, we're referring to that as cloud convergence, and that is managing many clouds as one.
Right. Cloud convergence. I mean, it just seems so logical. And when you see this, you cannot unsee it. I've got this feeling, and I'm sure you're going to, tell me about this, that it's not a common thing. There's not a lot of, maybe hardly any enterprises out there that have multiple clouds are working in a cloud convergence atmosphere.
That's true, and it's true for a lot of different reasons. What we found at Verge in looking out at the landscape in hybrid cloud or multi-cloud environments is that there is a total lack of tools or platforms out there that allow enterprises to be able to do that very easily, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can either try to build your own, or you can go to one of the large service companies, the Deloittes or Accentures of the world, and they'll be glad to build you custom tools. But a platform that's out of the box, right, and does that, we've found very few, if any, that really are for that. And so if you think about using artificial intelligence with the concept of cloud convergence, then it makes the management and it makes building these platforms not only feasible, but practical. And there is a real need to be able to do that for enterprises today.
Right, right. Well, so let me ask you this. It seems like as though Kubernetes is all the rage out there and it's like the holy grail almost right now with cloud environments. What is help us define, help me to understand what Kubernetes is, define it for me. And then how is that differentiated from what you're talking about with cloud convergence and the horizontal cloud?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of major players in the cloud services space, right? Kubernetes is one, right? And I would think that Kubernetes is very useful. It's a great platform, right? For what it does. It can provision applications and databases, and it can monitor what's going on with those. It is a very useful tool, right? For the enterprise, right? But Kubernetes doesn't really what I'm going to call manage anything, right? It provisions, it monitors, it provides feedback, it provides alerts, it provides reporting, it provides data, but it doesn't manage the end device like a database in real time at
Right,
runtime. It doesn't do that, right?
right,
And so in order to make your data environments more resilient or fault tolerant, right, you have to be able to manage, let's say, a live database or a live application. I mean, really manage it, know what's happening. And then the most important thing is to then be able to take action to correct what you see as workload issues or processing issues, and to be able to correct that while the application of the database is running so that it doesn't go down, so that you continue to optimize the performance of that application or database as you're moving forward, right? And so in order to be able to do the cloud convergence very efficiently, those sort of tools and platforms are needed. And I think they're being built and will continue to be built. It is my prediction that in 5 years, intelligent IT management using AI is going to be the standard, not the outlier that it is today.
right, right. Wow. Okay. So we're unpacking so much over here in just this brief lapse of time. What I wanted to do was to talk about something that we discussed offline yesterday, Jimmy, and that is, this how this whole uptime paradigm has become kind of like almost like an outdated, and there's like a kind of a misplaced priority over server uptime over application and business process performance. If you could unpack this for us, that would be great.
Thank you. I'll try. There's a lot to unpack here, and I'll give you my thoughts. So, I think there's been a lot of shifts in what I'm going to call IT management focus, past to present, right?
Right.
At one time, the IT focus was building and maintaining the best in class applications and databases that truly enabled the enterprise to be more competitive, right? That was the goal. That's the reason you had an IT department, right? And so what the app or the database was hosted on, the server, the infrastructure, wasn't near as important as what the app did for the enterprise, right?
Right.
And to me, somewhere along the way, that seems to have been flipped on its head, right?
Right.
Uh, uh, and the focus changed to server uptime and stabilization, right? Stability. As any changes that you make in a cloud environment, it costs you, right? And that includes making any changes to the application and restarting it, any maintenance time, anytime you want to pull that application off in a test environment, you got to build a test environment, right? And then you got to rehost it back. So everything you do in the cloud costs you money, right?
Right.
So it's it's easier to just maintain, right?
Hmm.
It's easier to just be stable, right?
Right.
And because part of the issue, when you controlled everything in the enterprise, you had your own data centers, right? You
Right.
controlled the underlying infrastructure. You managed all the servers. You know how the servers reacted. You managed your own network. You know how the network reacted. You knew everything about that environment and how to manage it, right? But as you move to the cloud, you gave up that control, and all that you have control over is the actual applications riding on that hosted environment, right?
Right.
And so making changes becomes, in some cases, a lot trickier, right? Architectural changes, especially in your applications, right? And so it's easier just to not do that, or it's easier to just make changes that you have to make and not worry about the world class, best in class application that will enable your organization to do better, right? And
Right.
so it's easier just not to rock that boat, right? And so I think all of those factors together is what really has caused the shift. And so at Verge, what we're trying to do is flip that back again, right? Because of the intelligent management of, let's say, a database, right? It becomes very, very unimportant what it's hosted on, where it's hosted, what it's doing, because we can manage that database independent of the hardware that it's on, right?
Right.
And be able to optimize the performance completely agnostic of service providers or hardware. And to me, that flipping back is going to be the trend of the future across anybody that's trying to do cloud convergent management, is
Hmm.
that where it's hosted, how it's hosted, all those factors need to cease to matter. What you need to do is be able to actually manage the application or manage the database independently of that, right? And
Right.
and be able to move it, to migrate it, to scale it, to replicate it, to do all those things. Now, I'm not saying that infrastructure is not important. It is
Right.
absolutely important.
Yeah. Yeah.
To keep up that hosted environment, what I'm talking about is a focus, right?
Right.
And being have the freedom to not put as much emphasis on the hosting as you do your actual competitive applications and database
Right.
architecture. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, but I'm also wanting to get some clarification from you on something. And being that I am not as technical as you are, I wanted to maybe see if you can help me clarify something. This sounds a little bit like my, so good understanding of what a virtual machine is. So how is what you're describing different from a virtual machine, everything that VMware and its
Oh,
competitors?
yeah. Good point, and
Mm,
good question, right?
yeah.
So VMware uses a hypervisor to establish virtual machines within a physical machine. And so, for example, when VMware fails over something, let's say a database needs to fall over, you can't just fall over a database.
Right.
You fall over the whole machine. So it's still about the machine. It's about the hardware. It's
Right.
about, so if a machine goes down, then VMware takes that machine and they can move it, they can replicate it. But everything on that virtual server moves with that machine, right? All
Mm,
the databases, all the applications that are running on that virtual machine, they all move with that machine, right?
right.
Where what I'm talking about is being able to manage that database or that application independent of that virtual machine, right? So,
Mhm.
you know, I don't really care what that machine is doing. If I don't have the resources or I have an issue with how that machine is operating, I can just move that database off that machine. I can move it to a larger server. I can split and do the scaling in and out depending upon workload. I can balance the workload. I can do all of those things independent of the hosting machine that that database is on.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for that clarification. And it does make perfect sense because the virtual machine is really just a way of creating many different machines within a single
Yeah,
server
physical
or
machine.
a physical or a series of physical servers. So yes,
Right.
totally. Okay, so cloud convergence, which is really the wave of the future, and it's happening now. You're leading the way, but I'm sure that this is going to catch on, and other people are going to start doing this. But so let me ask you this though: what are some of the concrete performance improvements or the benefits that companies can get when they're able to operate in a converged cloud? I know that during a previous conversation we talked about eliminating downtime. For example, I'm constantly getting notifications from, for example, my bank. I actually have a couple of banks that I do business with. They'll say, hey, there's a maintenance window this weekend at starting at 2 a.m. Well, what if I'm out um, at a bar with my friends and I want to see how much money I have left to buy a round of drinks for everybody? I can't do that during that maintenance window, right?
Right.
So, and then there's other things like, database migration from one location to the other, et cetera. I'm just wondering if you can kind of get into some of the benefits, some of the performance enhancements of having a cloud convergence.
Sure, sure. Right, right. So being able, if you want to break down cloud convergence and you say, what do I really mean when I say cloud convergence? Because what's happening even amongst the vertical hybrid cloud management silos is that I have a certain set of tools within that cloud or within that environment that helps me manage my databases or whatever, right? And so if I look at cloud convergence, right, am I only talking about visibility and monitoring and reporting? If I am, cloud convergence has an advantage, and it still has an advantage over a vertical single view of my enterprise, right? But the real trick to me in doing effective cloud convergence is being able to take action based upon the data you're given, based upon what's happening in real time at runtime when you're processing data, being able to take action to correct things, right? So you say, well, yeah, yes, because if I could do that, I can create a resilient fault tolerance environment that is self managing and self healing, and that I can use AI and machine learning to predict workload issues in the future and actually take action before that occurrence happens
Right.
so I can avoid it. I
Right.
can resolve it. I can mitigate it. And being able to do those things allows me to truly manage in a cloud convergent environment.
Right. Okay, well that's fantastic. And so I was wondering if you could maybe kind of give me some specific examples, specific scenarios, like, migrating a database from one cloud to another. Let's just say you have a multinational corporation and they have, a cloud on the West Coast, maybe, California, Nevada, and they have another cloud in Florida or Virginia, and then maybe they have a cloud in Europe somewhere, and then in Asia, and for some reason they have to have certain data maintained in that particular country. I was wondering if you could kind of explain some of these scenarios to me.
Yeah, sure, sure. So I guess at some basic level, if we talk about what do enterprises have, right? And so typically an enterprise has lots of different places where they collect data, right? Whether
Right,
that's sales data, whether that's operational data, all those little nodes everywhere is collecting data, right? All
right,
those offices scattered across are collecting data. But then typically an enterprise will have much fewer points of processing, right? uh, Major credit card companies, let's just take that as an example.
right.
They may have thousands of points of collection, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they have like two or three processing plants, right? Where they
Right,
really do the processing, right?
right,
And so from those processing, then you have to then distribute what you're processing to the people within your organization who need that data, whether that's be sales and marketing or profiling or billing and finance. It all needs to go to different places, right?
right,
And so enterprises that are have multiple cloud environments or multiple nodes on a national or international space have that issue today. And the things that complicate that is, as you were pointing out earlier, is things like in some environments, data locality, data residency, data sovereignty, where data has to stay within certain geographical regions by law, right?
right,
To protect the end customer's data, right? So that would be one way of looking at, I can move data, but no, I can't move data here, but I can move data here. So that comes back to the intelligent management aspect, right? So how easy would it be if I could just write a simple policy, a simple rule, if you would,
mm-hmm.
that says, okay, for the data for, let's say, my all my clients in Germany, I am going to put a rule in there to make sure that this database does not move out of Germany. That wherever this database is, it's always going to be within the boundaries of Germany, right?
Right,
So I can control where the data is stored. And typically in cloud environments, you can't do that. The
mm-hmm.
cloud guys are going to store that data wherever is the most convenient and economically feasible for them to store it.
Right,
If that happens to be in Germany, that's cool.
yeah,
If it happens to be somewhere else, well, you don't know where your data is at, right?
right,
So being able to manage that data and being able to just one, if you would, one pane of glass to be able to visibly see where your database is at all times and the health and well-being of that database at all times is huge, right?
right, right.
So you ask also about some scenarios. So being able to, let's just talk about being able to scale. Workloads are scaling.
Mhm.
Workloads are fluctuating in and out. It's not a stable environment. Very few have very stable environments, right?
Right,
It could be that you're retail and you're very sensitive to holidays or the periods between Thanksgiving and Christmas or Black Friday, where
right,
your transaction volume goes up like 500%, right? And so in today's environment, if you look across all your processing that the enterprise is doing, how do I ensure that I have enough processing power to handle that? Well,
right,
I know last year I did 300% more volume on Black Friday than normal. The year before that I did 500, so somewhere between 300 and 500% more than my normal every day. but I don't know whether it's 3 or 500%, and maybe it's going to be 600% this year because everybody has more money this year, right?
Right.
And so you guess and you say, well, I've got to go build some server infrastructure. I got to over provision what I normally do in order to be able to hopefully, I guessed right, and I have enough servers to handle whatever volume is coming my way.
Right.
The issue with how that's managed today is that once you build those servers, they're there, they're costing you money, right?
Right.
Right. Where if you had an intelligent cloud convergent management system, right, it would allow you to incrementally scale on demand, on workload demand. You're monitoring the workload, you're managing the workload. You know when your servers are starting to bog down. You know when, if I don't do something in another 20 minutes, everything's going to fall over because,
Yeah.
you're just going to fill up, right? And so what if I could predict when I needed to add another server to the cluster? What if I could go out and make that happen based upon the data that I'm collecting in real time? What if I could continue to scale on demand as I needed those on demand resources? And then as that workload fluctuates, let's say at 2 in the afternoon, I only needed 50 extra servers, not 75 extra servers, and I start scaling in. And then as the volume built back up, I scale back out. Being able to have what I'm going to call an elastic processing bandwidth, right? I'm able to take any workload, manage any workload, scale it out, scale it back in based upon demand of the workload, right? And balancing that. And if you're working on a cloud convergent environment, you can scale out within the same cloud, or you can scale out in a different cloud and manage that cluster across the cloud environment, balance that depending upon cost, depending upon availability, depending upon location and how close those databases need to be to your processing environment. You can actually make intelligent decisions about your environment to save money, to be more productive, and to be able to address any workload issue that comes up.
Yeah. Well, you know that what's kind of ironic about what you say is that that was the promise that the individual cloud vendors
Yep.
gave. Oh, you can scale dynamically, and then you can retrench dynamically. All be, but it seems like as though the promise didn't pan out.
Yeah. Well, so within that particular cloud environment, maybe that works to some extent, right? But if you're across 4 to 7 different cloud environments, as most enterprises are today, there's no way that AWS, for example, is going to scale out to Azure to make sure you got enough processing, right? For the stuff that's in Azure. Azure is going to scale out, AWS is going to scale out, Google, IBM, all the Oracle, they're all going to scale out within their own clouds, right? But scaling across, right? Being able to manage across that environment and being able to pick the scaling that you need based upon where you're at physically, where that node is where
Right.
it becomes tricky, right? Because there's not a ubiquitous cloud provider out there that
Mhm.
it has a facility or infrastructure everywhere that your corporate footprint may land, right?
Right.
So you don't have the ability to scale AWS into uh, uh, an area where AWS is not, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You have to scale in Google where that is. And so that adds to the complexity, right?
Mhm.
So you need intelligent management capabilities that are provided by AI, machine learning, other technologies in order to be able to see that entire fabric, right?
Mhm.
And make intelligent decisions. And those intelligent decisions can be part of the automation where those decisions are made
Right.
and then action is taken to avoid problems in the future.
Wow. Okay. This is fascinating. And this, I think the word needs to really get out about how this is a much better way to run your enterprise IT department across multiple clouds. One last question. Is there anything that maybe I should have asked you about these topics, about the sacred cows, about vertical versus horizontal management, about some of the benefits of the converged cloud that I didn't ask that you want to communicate before we
Right.
conclude this particular session?
Right. So if I think about cloud convergence, to me, it just makes sense. One of the issues that I think many enterprises face today is that of being able to work across the complexity of different cloud service providers, right? That are
Right.
that are out there, right? And most enterprises today have some of their, let's say, database assets that are still in proprietary data centers, right? They've got some of them in AWS or Google or, 500 others around the globe, right?
Right.
So if you then think about, well, how do I manage that, right? Because cloud service providers make it very easy for you to come in, but they make it very difficult for you to leave. And they put financial disincentives for you moving your data out of their particular cloud because that's how they make
Right.
money.
Exactly.
And so what that forces is that enterprises typically have to, if you would, suboptimize their business processes in order to operate within that cloud service provider silo, right? Don't
Right.
want to get out of that cloud, or you don't want to move much stuff in that cloud because it costs you money every time you do, right?
Right.
And so if you had a greenfield where you could manage your operations within and across all of those cloud service providers independent of the hosting environment,
Hmm.
then you could really optimize your business processes versus having to silo processing in this one because I can't move data out of this one to the people who really need it because it costs too much money to keep doing that every day, right? And so being able to optimize your business processes independent of service providers would be a huge problem today that needs to be solved.
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. Well, Jimmy, I thank you so much for your time today, and we will see everybody in a next episode of this podcast. Thank you.